Welcome to the Buried Pixels, digging up the past, one game at a time. Stick around, will you?
Aha. Yes. Yeah. Let's go. Hey guys, Retro Gaming Maniac here, and welcome to the Buried Pixels. Today, we are taking a look at Cybernator on the Super Nintendo. So growing up, my first real introduction to mechs was probably in Transformers, but really I didn't start watching mech anime or cartoons until I saw Gundam Wing, and that really pulled me in. Something about the big mech battles in space and with the military and seeing the different kinds that there were. They had the standard, mechs that the military used and then the special ones that the heroes used. It was really cool to me, and it really got me interested in this whole genre. So I started playing Armored Core games. I started watching more Gundam Wing, trying to play that wherever I could. There was actually a PS1 game that we played a lot called Gundam Battle Assault, but it was just a really fun time for me. Now when it comes to Cybernator, this was a game I had only played once growing up because a friend had it, and after I got introduced to Gundam Wing, I really got into mech games, so I kind of went back and played Cybernator again, and I was just blown away with how good this game is. So Cybernator was actually released in 1992, and it was a prequel to a game called Target Earth, which oddly came out first back in 1990 on the Sega Genesis, and I think on a few other systems. But this game, while it's a prequel, it came out later, and to me it's far superior than Target Earth. This game is a side-scrolling action platformer, but it also has some shooter elements to it, some horizontal shooting elements. But the game takes place in the future. So in this future, Earth's natural resources are dwindling, and you have these different factions that are fighting over control of these fossil fuels and other resources, as well as control over the moon and who owns the moon. So that's kind of funny, actually. So you play in something called an assault suit, which is basically a mech, and it starts off with your ship crashing through another enemy ship or space station, and then you just get out and start blasting enemies. Now graphically, this game looks amazing. The sprites are pretty big and detailed, and the colors are nice and vibrant. So the controls in this game take a little to get used to, not because they're bad or anything like that, or difficult per se, it's just because there's so many controls. You're able to point your gun in almost any direction, but there is some lag when you do that because it takes time for your mech to aim his gun so you can point it up or down. But whatever direction you want his gun to point, you have to hold the D-pad in that direction, and then you basically have to wait for his gun to sway upwards and to lock into that location that you're pointing. So it's not hard, but it does take some getting used to, and you have to learn to kind of time your aiming and everything, because it's not going to be instant. But the game does a good job with this because it allows you to really fully control your mech without letting it feel too cumbersome and too slow to the point where it'd be boring or annoying. So you can jump, or if you hold the jump button, you can actually use a jetpack, and that does use up your energy meter at the top right or your power meter. If you're taking too much damage or there's just too much going on at the screen at once, you can actually deploy a shield, and that will negate a lot of the damage, and it comes in handy in a lot of these situations because some of these levels are pretty crazy. And it's another thing to talk about. These levels are very well designed. They're very memorable. Each level is very unique, and a lot of them are just space stations and things like this, but there's a lot of detail to them. You have all these different turrets that are aiming at you. You have other enemy mechs. And then even when you destroy an enemy mech, you'll see this little dude jump out and start running around or running away from you. It's really funny to see, actually. So the main character in this game, in case I didn't mention it before, is a character named Jake Brain, which is kind of an unfortunate last name, in my opinion. That's odd. But you take control of Jake Brain, and he's the one piloting this suit that you're in. And the cutscenes in this game are pretty cool. You actually have an anime-style looking cutscene to them, which is really neat. Now the gameplay is very similar kind of throughout, but it does have a few different levels where it changes it up a little bit. So for instance, in the second stage, it takes the form of more of a horizontal shooter. So you have basically a lot of enemies on screen at once shooting at you. You have to dodge their attacks. You have to dodge asteroids, as you can see I just failed to do. Now, one thing that is kind of annoying about this is anytime there's like radio chatter or your team is talking to you, the game pauses and it just does like text at the bottom of the screen that pop up, which is kind of odd that they slow down the combat for that. And it does break up the gameplay some and the flow, but I mean, it's not that bad. It is just a little bit of an annoyance. But as you can see here, this game at this point kind of plays like Bureau Fighter. If you've ever played that on the NES, you kind of get to fly around all directions at your own will and shoot. And it's pretty cool. They implement all these different gameplay styles while still kind of keeping with the same control scheme. There's some nice variation in the level design. Like for this level, you're like down inside of a cave and you have your flashlight to kind of have to look around and find the enemies, and it's really cool the way the lighting works. All in all though, there's some really nice variety in the type of levels that you get to play on, whether it's in space, in a spaceship or a space station, underground, or on the ground just fighting on a planet. It's just really cool that they have so many different variations of the levels, but still keep to like the core mechanics the same. At one point in the game, you're actually fighting this enemy and his ship as it's all falling and crashing down to Earth. So you're kind of like, everything's red and glowing from the heat from like going through the Earth's atmosphere. And it's just a really epic moment that is really fun to play. It's very intense and it's very memorable. Just look at this. I mean, it's crazy looking. So there's not much variety when it comes to weapons. There are some power-ups that you can pick up that will, power up your weapon or change your weapon, but you really just have your blaster and your punch option, which is great for getting enemies off of you. Like I mentioned earlier, this game came out in 1992 in Japan and then in 1993 in the US, and it was made by Konami. So, that's pretty good. Konami has a good track record with their games. They always make really high quality games. So this game was actually censored when it was made for the US audience. They had a scene at the end of the game where the enemy or the president of the enemy team actually goes and shoots himself. When I found this out, I had to go watch it, and sure enough, if you watch gameplay of the Japanese version, you can see this scene, which is missing from the US version, and it's probably a good thing it was censored. It's kind of wild that was left in the Japanese version. But all in all, this is a fantastic game, especially when you're talking about mech games on the Super Nintendo. There's very few games, if any, that are quite to this level. I mean, really, up until Cybernator, you had games like Metal Mech on the NES, which, well, not a horrible game. It's a far cry from what we got with Cybernator. Now, another game on the Super Nintendo that comes to mind that is very similar to Cybernator would be a game called Metal Warriors. This is a game I had for a long time, and it's just a super great game, very similar to Cybernator, but there are some things I like about Cybernator more than Metal Warriors. In my opinion, Metal Warriors kind of has the superior cutscenes per se, but I feel like the level design is better in Cybernator, and I think the graphics overall and the sprite design and everything's better in Cybernator. But Metal Warriors does have a two-player versus mode, which is pretty cool. But this is definitely a game worth checking out if you can find it. It's not expensive. It's between a $20 or $30 game. Totally worth getting. But Cybernator on the Super Nintendo is, to me, just one of the best mech games you can get. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of The Buried Pixels, where we took a look at Cybernator. I didn't go super in-depth with the game. There's still a lot to talk about, but definitely check it out. And hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit that like button, subscribe, and we will see you on the next one.